The scrapyard stretched for miles under a dying red sky. Broken machines, twisted metal, and rusted prosthetics lay scattered like the bones of a forgotten age. Among this wasteland, a man moved quietly, careful with every step. His name was Ethan, and he had lived most of his life in silence. Every day was the same. He walked through piles of scrap, pulling wires from broken machines, gathering metal parts, and placing them in an old cart. His hands were rough, his clothes patched, with cloth from discarded uniforms. To others, this world was dead, but for Ethan, it was a place to survive. He never spoke to anyone. There were no neighbors, no family, and no voices to greet him when the sun rose. Silence had become his companion, a constant friend in the ruins. Of the past, people in nearby settlements whispered about him, calling him the silent collector. Some said he was mad. Others said he had once lost everything and simply chose not to speak again. But Ethan did not care. Words had no use when survival was all that mattered. He needed only his tools, his cart, and his scrapyard. And in this silence, he found a strange kind of peace one evening. As the sun dipped low and shadows grew long, Ethan bent down to pull a half-broken metal arm from the dirt. The prosthetic was covered in rust, but he studied it with interest. Maybe he could melt it down. Maybe he could rebuild it into something useful. He carried it back to his small workshop. A hut made from scavenged steel and wood inside. The workshop was filled with broken things waiting for new purpose. Old computers, shattered helmets, shattered drones, and machines that had once been powerful but were now only dead shells. Ethan lit a small lamp, set the prosthetic on his workbench, and began his quiet routine. The scraping of tools was the only sound, sharp and lonely in the night. As hours passed, Ethan noticed something strange. He thought he had seen footprints outside. At first he ignored them. Animals sometimes wandered close to the scrapyard. But then, when he stepped out to fetch more wires, he stopped. The footprints were deep, heavier than human boots, and shaped in a way he had never seen before. Ethan crouched down, brushing the dust away with his rough hands. The prints stretched across the yard, leading into the shadows. A chill moved through him, but he said nothing. He never said anything. Instead, he listened, his ears sharp against the silence. And in that silence he heard something new, a low sound, like a groan of pain, carried through the scrapyard. It was not human, not the voice of any settler or wanderer he had known. It was deeper, stranger, and filled with suffering. Ethan's heart beat faster, but he did not run. Slowly, with cautious steps, he followed the trail of footprints. The sky above was darker now, the stars breaking through the red clouds. The scrapyard seemed alive with shadows. Every piece of metal looked like it might hide a secret. The sound grew louder as he approached. A collapsed pile of junked ships. And then, behind a broken wing, he saw it. A figure, taller than any man, lay half hidden in the dirt. Its armor was cracked, glowing faintly with strange energy. Blood, thick and dark, unlike human blood, spilled across the metal ground. The creature lifted its head weakly, eyes burning with an alien light, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt his silence break inside. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The alien warrior stared at him, its breath harsh and broken. One hand reached out, claws scraping against the metal floor. It did not attack, it did not threaten. It simply looked at him as if asking for help. Ethan froze. The scrapyard had always been his world, quiet and safe. But now, something from the stars, something wounded and dangerous, had fallen into his silence. He could walk away. He could return to his workshop and pretend nothing had happened. But deep inside, something told him his life would never be the same again. The wind blew across the ruins, carrying dust into the night. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he stood over the alien. His silence had always kept him apart from the world. But in that moment, under the stars and the broken machines, he realized a choice was before him. He could stay silent, or he could Act and the scrapyard, for the first time in years, did not feel silent at all. Asterisk, the night was long in the scrapyard. Stars hung low and silent above the twisted metal hills. Ethan stood motionless, staring at the wounded alien lying in the shadows. For years he had lived without speaking, without caring about anything beyond his scraps. But now, something alive, something dangerous had entered his world. The alien tried to lift itself, but the weight of its armor dragged it back down. Its breathing was harsh, ragged, as though every breath was a battle. Ethan hesitated, torn between fear and a strange pull inside him. He wanted to walk away, yet his eyes refused to leave the creature. Finally, Ethan stepped closer. The ground crunched beneath his boots, breaking the silence. The alien's eyes glowed faintly, too burning. Orbs in the dark, it muttered something. Words broken and distorted, not human, but the sound carried desperation. The sound of someone begging not to be left behind. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He crouched down, studying the wounds. Strange black blood dripped slowly from cuts in the armor, sizzling as it touched the ground. This was no ordinary traveler, no bandit from the wasteland. This was something far greater, a being from the stars. He touched the edge of the alien's armor carefully. It was warm, too warm, humming faintly with dying energy. The alien flinched but did not resist. Its strength was fading, and Ethan realized that without help, it would not survive the night. He stood, glanced back at his workshop, a small hut filled with tools, wires, and scraps. Nothing like a hospital, yet it was all he had. Ethan clenched his fists. His silence had always kept him apart from the world. But now that silence was heavy, he could ignore the creature and stay safe, or risk everything by helping. With a deep breath, he slid his arms under the alien's shoulders. The weight nearly crushed him. The armor felt like carrying stone. He stumbled but forced himself to move, dragging the warrior slowly toward the workshop. Every step felt endless. The alien groaned once, a sound that echoed like thunder in the scrapyard. Ethan's muscles screamed. But he did not stop. At last, they reached the workshop. Ethan pushed the door open with his foot, dragging the alien inside. He lowered it onto the workbench, tools clattering to the floor. The small lamp flickered, light spilling across strange armor and broken flesh. The alien turned its head weakly, staring at the scraps hanging from the walls. Its lips moved, forming a word Ethan could not understand. Then its eyes closed, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Ethan stood there, breathing hard. He had brought it in, but now what? He knew nothing about alien wounds, nothing about this creature's blood or body. Yet something inside told him to try. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about a chance, a moment bigger than himself. He pulled out wires, cloth, and even pieces of metal he had cleaned earlier. With careful hands, he began removing pieces of cracked armor. The alien groaned, its claws scraping the workbench. But Ethan kept working, silent and determined. Hours passed, the scrapyard outside, sinking deeper into darkness. Inside, the sound of tools filled the air. Ethan patched torn flesh with makeshift bandages, used melted scrap to seal cracks in armor. He worked the way he always had, patient, precise, but this time, not for survival, this time, for someone else. When the alien finally lay still, breathing steadier, Ethan stepped back, exhausted. His hands were black with strange blood, his arms trembling from effort. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, staring at the figure before him, a being from the stars, saved by a silent scrap collector. But even as he rested, something gnawed at his thoughts. The footprints he had seen earlier. They were not alone. If this warrior had stumbled into his scrapyard wounded, then something or someone had wounded it, and those hunters might still be out there, searching. The silence of the scrapyard suddenly felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with danger. Every shadow outside seemed to hold watching eyes. Every whisper of wind carried the threat of footsteps returning. Ethan looked once more at the alien. It slept now. Armor broken, but spirit still alive. He did not know its name, its purpose, or why fate had pushed it into his life. But he knew this. The silence he had built for himself was over. From now on, his world would not be quiet. It would be filled with danger, with choices, with voices he could no longer ignore. And in the dust of the scrapyard, strange signs had already begun to appear. The night faded slowly into a pale dawn. The scrapyard looked the same as it always did. Piles of broken machines, jagged metal, and rust-colored dust stretching in every direction. But inside Ethan's small workshop, everything had changed. Alien Warrior still lay on the workbench, its chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. Its armor was cracked and burned, glowing faintly as if the energy within struggled to stay alive. Ethan sat in a corner, exhausted, his head resting against the cold wall. He had not slept, not even for a moment. His eyes stayed fixed on the creature, unsure if it would wake or die before the sun climbed high. Hours passed. The silence inside the workshop was thick, broken only by the hiss of the alien's strange breathing. Ethan finally stood, stretching his tired muscles. He gathered water from a small container, hesitating before placing it beside the warrior. He did not know if it could drink, if it even needed water, but it was the only thing he could offer. Then, without warning, the alien stirred. Its claws twitched against the metal table, scratching faint lines into the surface. Its eyes snapped open, glowing like fire trapped behind glass. Ethan froze, every muscle tense. The warrior tried to rise but collapsed back. Groaning deeply, it turned its head toward Ethan, studying him with an intensity that pierced the air. Slowly, painfully, it spoke, its voice deep, broken, and heavy with struggle. "Who?" "Man," Ethan's heart jolted. The sound was rough but unmistakable. It had recognized him. For years, Ethan had lived without hearing his name, without speaking a single word. But now an alien from the stars had spoken directly to him, the warrior's. Hand lifted weakly, pointing toward the scraps on the wall, wires, broken weapons, and prosthetics hanging like trophies of survival. It tried to say more, but the words dissolved into coughs, black blood spilling from the corner of its mouth. Ethan rushed forward without thinking, pressing a piece of cloth against the wound. The alien flinched at his touch but did not resist. Instead, its eyes softened, as if it understood that this fragile human was trying to keep it alive. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The alien muttered again, voice quieter this time. "Hunted. Not safe. They come." Its hand trembled as it gripped Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. The meaning was clear. Danger was near. Ethan swallowed hard. He glanced toward the door, half expecting to see shadows already creeping inside. His world had always been empty, silent, safe in its loneliness. Now that silence was cracking, filling with threats he could not yet see. The alien released his wrist, its arm falling limp against the bench. Its breathing slowed, as if even speaking had drained what little strength remained. Ethan stood there, the weight of its warning pressing on him. If hunters were coming, then the scrapyard would no longer be his shelter. It would become a battlefield for the first time in years. He whispered a word, his voice quiet, rough from disuse. "Why?" The words slipped out before he could stop it, his own silence broken. The alien's eyes opened halfway, catching the sound. It did not answer fully, only a fragmented phrase. "War chased. Must survive." Ethan understood enough. This was not just a wounded traveler. This was a soldier, a warrior caught in battles far beyond Earth. And somehow, that war had spilled into his scrapyard. A heavy sound echoed outside. Ethan stiffened. Turning his head, it was faint, but unmistakable. The low hum of engines in the distance. The hunters, whoever they were, might already be drawing closer. The alien tried again to rise, pushing against the table. Its strength failed, and Ethan steadied it without a word. The warrior's gaze locked with his, fierce and unyielding despite the wounds. In that look, Ethan felt something strange, a connection, a silent trust forming between two beings from different worlds. The warrior had no choice but to rely on him, and Ethan, though still silent, felt a new determination burning inside. He looked around his workshop, at the scraps and tools that had once been only for survival. Now they might become weapons, defenses, a way to fight against whoever was coming. The thought both terrified and awakened him. The alien's voice rumbled low, almost like a vow. "Human, help. Fight." The words were broken, but the meaning was sharp as steel. Ethan nodded once, silently. For years, he had lived in the quiet shadows of broken machines, but now, standing beside a warrior from the stars, he knew the silence was over. His scrapyard was no longer just a graveyard of the past. It was about to become the front line of a war he never asked for. And in that moment, as the wind carried the distant echo of engines, Ethan realized his life had been waiting for this encounter all along. The sun was high now, its pale light falling across the scrapyard like a thin sheet of fire. Ethan's workshop stood quiet, but inside, the silence was heavy with tension. The alien warrior rested on the workbench, its wounds bound by crude bandages. Its armor cracked and lifeless, yet its eyes burned with strength, a fire that even pain could not extinguish. Ethan moved around the room, gathering wires, scraps, and tools. Every sound of clattering metal reminded him that danger was closing. In the alien's broken words echoed in his head. Hunted. Not safe, they come. He had lived his life hiding from the world, choosing silence over company. Now, without choice, the world had entered his door, and with it came a secret he had never imagined. The alien stirred, claws scraping against the bench as it tried to sit up. Ethan rushed forward, steadying its shoulder. The warrior grunted, but did not push him away. Its glowing eyes studied him with a strange intensity. Then, slowly it spoke again. "You. Human, why? Help?" The words were broken, but clear enough. Ethan's throat tightened, his voice weak from years of silence. He whispered, "Because you are alive." The alien tilted its head, confused by the simplicity of the answer. But there was no time to question. It lifted its hand and pressed it against its chest plate. With effort, it pulled free a small object hidden within the cracked armor. It glowed faintly, a shard of crystal, sharp-edged and pulsing with strange energy. The alien held it out, forcing it into Ethan's palm. "Keep safe." The warrior rasped. Ethan stared at the shard, its surface alive with moving light. It hummed in his hand like a heartbeat. He had seen thousands of scraps in his life, but nothing like this. This was not broken metal. This was alive. The alien continued, forcing words through pain. "Enemy. Want this. Must protect." Ethan's chest tightened. The shard was not just a fragment of armor. It was something powerful, something dangerous. And now it was in his hands. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, unnatural hum. Ethan froze, listening. It was not the wind. It was engines, distant but approaching. The hunters were near. The alien's warning had not been a lie. Ethan clenched the shard tighter, slipping it into his pocket. The warrior grabbed his wrist suddenly, its grip like iron despite its weakness. "Do not let them take it," it growled. Ethan nodded, his silence no longer the emptiness it once was. Now it carried a vow. He hurried across the workshop, gathering pieces of metal, wires, and broken machines. For years he had rebuilt scraps only to sell or survive. Now, every broken thing became a weapon, a defense, a chance to stand against what was coming. The alien watched him, its breaths rough but steady. It spoke again, slower this time, as if teaching a child. "Hunters, ruthless. Kill all. They follow crystal. They smell its power." Ethan shivered at the thought. If these hunters were strong enough to bring down this warrior, what hope did he have? But his hands did not stop moving. He wired together pieces of drones, sharpened metal into spikes. Set traps at the door. His mind worked faster than his fear. He had always been silent, but silence did not mean weakness. It meant listening, watching, preparing. As the afternoon dragged on, the sound outside grew louder. The alien forced itself upright, clutching the edge of the bench. "You fight with me," it demanded. Ethan looked at the warrior who had fallen from the stars into his scrapyard. He gave a small nod. He would not run, not now. The alien's eyes narrowed with something that almost looked like respect. It pressed its claw against Ethan's chest lightly. "Strange human," it muttered. "Silent, but strong." Then, both of them turned as a shadow moved across the scrapyard. Above the twisted piles of junk, a ship descended slowly, its engines growling like beasts. Dust rose in thick waves, swallowing the sunlight. Ethan's heart hammered. In his chest, the hunters had arrived. The alien reached for a broken weapon on the table, forcing itself to stand despite the pain. Ethan gripped a makeshift blade of sharpened scrap. They were two beings from different worlds, one a silent collector, the other a wounded warrior. But in this moment, they were the same defenders of a secret too dangerous to fall into enemy hands. The workshop trembled as the ship landed. Ethan felt the crystal burning in his pocket, alive with energy. He realized then what the alien's dangerous secret truly meant. The hunters would not stop until they had it. And if he failed, his silent life, and perhaps his world, would be torn apart. The scrapyard shook as the ship lowered itself onto the broken ground. Engines roared, blasting clouds of red dust into the air. Metal scraps clattered against one another like bones rattling in a storm. Ethan stood in the workshop doorway, his heart pounding. The shard in his pocket pulsed harder now, glowing faintly as if it knew its pursuers had come. Beside him, the alien warrior leaned heavily on the workbench, forcing itself upright. Its armor was cracked and its wounds raw, but its eyes blazed with fire. It gripped a broken weapon Ethan had repaired from scraps, barely functional, but still deadly in strong hands. Ethan held a jagged blade of sharpened steel, his knuckles white. He had never fought anything larger than a wild dog. Now he stood against enemies powerful enough to hunt a warrior from the stars. The ship's ramp lowered with a deep hiss. Dark figures emerged, silhouettes against the glowing engines. There were 3 at first, then 5, then more. Their bodies were tall, armored in black plates that shimmered like oil. Their movements were sharp, controlled, the steps of trained killers. The alien warrior's claws tightened on the weapon. "They hunters," it growled, its voice low but steady. Ethan said nothing, only shifted his grip on the blade. His silence was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence before a storm. The hunters spread out, scanning the scrapyard with devices that clicked and hummed. One raised its head, sniffing the air like a beast. Its mask glowed faintly, and its gaze turned toward the workshop. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. The shard burned hot in his pocket, calling to them like a beacon. The alien noticed it too, its eyes narrowing. "They smell the crystal," it rasped. Ethan's fingers brushed against the shard, feeling the pulse. For a moment he wanted to throw it away, to let it roll into the dust so the hunters would leave him. But he remembered the warrior's words, "Do not let them take it." And he knew that even if he gave it up, the hunters would not stop. They would kill them both. The first hunter stepped closer, its black armor shining under the weak sun. It raised a weapon unlike anything had seen before, a long rifle that hummed with energy. The alien bared its teeth, a sound half growl, half breath. Then, with sudden force, it shoved Ethan back inside the workshop. "Stay hidden," it hissed, but Ethan shook his head, gripping his blade tighter. The hunters advanced, their boots crunching against broken metal. Ethan's traps, wires strung between piles, sharpened spikes hidden beneath junk, waited silently. His mind raced. He had built these defenses for scavengers and thieves, not for armored killers from another world. Would they even slow them down? A sharp whistle cut the air. One hunter triggered a hidden wire, and the ground erupted with a shower of sparks as metal shards exploded upward. The creature staggered, its armor scorched. For the first time, Ethan saw surprise in its movements. His traps worked, not enough to stop them, but enough to make them bleed. The alien roared, a sound so powerful it shook the workshop walls. It stepped out into the open, limping but defiant. The hunters turned, their weapons raised, and for a moment, Ethan saw it. A battle between predators, each one fierce, each one dangerous. But Ethan could not stay inside. He stepped out, his blade shaking in his hand but his eyes steady. For years, silence had been his world. Now silence was his weapon. The hunters looked at him as if he were nothing, just a fragile human holding a scrap blade. But Ethan had one advantage they did not. He knew the scrapyard like it was part of his own body. He moved quickly, ducking between piles, luring one of the hunters toward a narrow gap, as it followed, its heavy armor scraping against the metal. Ethan pulled a lever he had built from broken gears. A cascade of rusted steel beams collapsed, crashing down onto the hunter, pinning it to the ground. It screamed, thrashing beneath the weight. Ethan's chest heaved, his silence trembling. Into something new, a silent victory. But there were more, too many. Blasts of energy tore through the scrapyard, sparks flying as metal melted under their fire. The alien fought fiercely, every strike of its weapon filled with rage. Yet it was wounded, slower than its enemies. Ethan darted forward, striking when he could, distracting, pulling hunters toward traps. Together, man and alien fought side by side, fragile flesh and wounded steel against a storm of black armor. The battle raged until the air itself felt alive with fire and dust. Ethan's arms burned with exhaustion, his clothes torn, his hands cut and bleeding. Still he fought, his silence unbroken. The shard pulsed hotter in his pocket, each beat like thunder. He did not know why it mattered or what power it held, but he knew this. If the hunters won, it would not only be the alien's life that ended. It would be his too at last. When the dust began to clear, 3 hunters lay broken among the scrap. 2 more circled, growling through their masks. The alien leaned heavily on its weapon, blood dripping from its wounds. Ethan stood beside it, chest heaving, blade trembling but still in his hand. The hunters had not expected resistance, not from a human scavenger and a half-dead warrior. But Ethan had shown them something new, the silence of a man who refused to break. And in that silence, the hunters hesitated. For the first time, they did not see just prey, they saw a challenge. Asterisk, the scrapyard was no longer silent, smoke curled into the pale sky, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and alien blood. Ethan stood with his blade still in hand, chest heaving, arms trembling. Beside him, the alien warrior leaned on its broken weapon, growling with each ragged breath. Around them lay the remains of shattered machines and fallen hunters. Their black armor cracked under the weight of traps and desperate strikes. But it was not over. More shadows moved beyond the rising smoke, dark shapes circling the scrapyard. The hunters were regrouping, their numbers still greater, their steps measured and cold. Ethan felt the shard burning in his pocket like a brand against his skin. It pulsed faster now, as if the presence of its enemies made it alive. He knew they would not stop, not until they had it. And him, the alien's voice was low, filled with warning. They will not stop. Its glowing eyes turned toward Ethan, fierce but tired. You, human, leave. Live, it wanted him to run, to escape while there was still a chance. But Ethan shook his head, silent yet unyielding. Running had always been his way. He had hidden in silence for years, avoiding people, avoiding battles, avoiding life. But something had changed. This war had come to his door, and if he turned away now, the silence he returned to would no longer be peace. It would be shame. Ethan moved quickly through the workshop, grabbing scraps, wires, and old parts. The alien watched in confusion. As he worked, to Ethan, every broken piece was not waste, but possibility. He wired together a rusted drone core with sharp metal blades, set charges of compressed fuel beneath old ship panels, strung nets of wire across narrow paths. His hands worked with a speed born not of training, but of desperation. He was no soldier, but he was something the hunters did not understand, a human survivor who had turned scrap into life. The alien grunted, almost amused despite its pain. Strange. Human, it muttered. Fight with junk. Ethan gave no reply, only tightened the last bolt and dragged his makeshift traps into position. The hunters advanced, their black armor glowing faintly with cruel light. Weapons hummed, sharp and deadly. They spread across the scrapyard like wolves, confident, certain of their victory. But Ethan knew this ground better than anyone. Every pile of metal, every shadow, every hidden pit was his ally. The first hunter stepped onto a disguised plate. Ethan yanked a lever, and the ground erupted with jagged steel beams. Slamming upward, the creature howled, impaled by its own arrogance. Before the others could react, Ethan hurled the wired drone core. It spun wildly, its blades tearing through the dust before exploding in a flash of fire. The shockwave sent hunters staggering, their armor scorched. The alien seized the moment, roaring as it lunged forward. Its broken weapon cracked against a hunter's mask, shattering it into sparks. Ethan darted alongside, his blades slashing at weak joints. Together, they fought not as strangers, but as a unit, a wounded warrior and a silent scavenger bound by survival. Blasts of energy lit the scrapyard, burning holes into the piles of junk. Ethan moved fast, his small body slipping between gaps the hunters could not follow. He led them into traps, dropping nets of wire from above, triggering bursts of compressed fuel that erupted in waves of fire. His silence became his weapon. No shouts, no warnings, no wasted breath, only precise movements, sudden strikes, and clever tricks. The alien saw him, saw how this fragile human risked everything without hesitation. It growled low, almost in respect. Courage. Human, it muttered. To the warrior, courage was strength in battle. But Ethan showed another kind. The courage to stand when he had always been alone. The courage to fight when he had every reason to run. The hunters faltered, their numbers thinned, their movements slowed. They had expected prey, not resistance. And in Ethan, they found something they did not understand, a human with no power. No weapon but scrap, yet unbroken in spirit. At last, silence returned for a brief moment, broken only by the hiss of smoke and the groans of the wounded alien. Ethan stood with his blade dripping dark fluid, his arms heavy but steady. His traps had worked, his courage had held, but he knew this was not the end. More would come. Stronger, angrier. The shard in his pocket pulsed once more, harder than before, as if calling out across the sky. The alien placed a clawed hand on his shoulder, its grip firm despite the wounds. Human, you fight like warrior, it said. Ethan met its glowing eyes, his silence carrying a truth louder than words. He was no longer just a silent collector. He was something else now. A man who had faced the hunters and stood unbroken. Above them, the clouds split with light. Far in the distance, more ships stirred, their engines echoing like thunder. The war was not finished. It had only just begun. Asterisk. The sky above the scrapyard was burning with light. Engines thundered in the distance. The sound of more ships approaching. The battle was not finished, and Ethan knew it. His arms shook from exhaustion, his hands torn and bloodied, but his grip on the blade did not weaken. Beside him, the alien warrior leaned heavily on its weapon, its body trembling, yet its eyes still glowing with fire. They had fought together through smoke and dust, through traps and fire. Hunters lay broken among the piles of rust and steel, their black armor cracked, their weapons silent, yet the shard in Ethan's pocket pulsed harder and harder, its light beating like a second heart. It was a beacon, calling to the sky, and the hunters would never stop chasing it. The alien turned toward him, its deep voice harsh but clear. "Human, you cannot hold forever." Its claw tapped the pocket where the shard burned. "They will come more. Stronger." Ethan nodded silently, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He knew it was true, but something inside him refused to let go. All his life, he had lived in silence. He had avoided people, avoided battles, avoided everything. That might hurt, but now in the middle of fire and blood, he found something worth holding onto, not the shard, but the choice to protect. He had been a scavenger, forgotten and ignored, yet now, even a warrior from the stars stood beside him, trusting him. The ground shook as another hunter leapt down from the smoke. Its armor gleamed sharper than the rest, its size greater, its steps heavier, a leader perhaps or something worse. It raised a weapon humming with power, the air vibrating with its energy. The alien growled and tried to step forward, but its body faltered. Ethan caught its arm, steadying it without words. The hunter roared and charged. Ethan's heart slammed in his chest, but he did not move away. Instead, he moved into the scrapyards, maze weaving between the piles of twisted steel. The alien followed, limping, both of them guiding the enemy into the traps Ethan had prepared. The leader smashed through one pile with ease, sparks flying. It was stronger, faster, more brutal. But Ethan knew the ground, every wire, every weak beam. He darted left, cutting through shadows, his silence making him a ghost. The alien struck from the right, claws flashing, forcing the leader to turn. The shard pulsed in Ethan's pocket like fire. He understood now. It was not only a secret, it was a weapon, not just energy, but life itself. And if the hunters wanted it so badly, it meant it was powerful enough to destroy or to save. The leader lunged, its weapon slicing through the air. Ethan dove forward, rolling across the dirt, pulling free the shard. It blazed in his hand, light spilling across the scrapyard. The hunter froze for a heartbeat, blinded by its glow, and in that moment, Ethan thrust it against the broken machine core he had wired earlier. The ground erupted in a storm of fire and light. The blast consumed the leader, shredding its armor in a rain of sparks. The air shook, metal collapsed, and silence followed, heavy, absolute. Ethan lay on the ground, chest heaving, ears ringing. The shard flickered in his hand, dim now, its energy spent. The leader's body smoked among the ruins, lifeless. The alien limped toward him, leaning down, its claws brushing the shard before looking at Ethan. "You, human, did what warriors could not," it said. Its voice was rough, but filled with something new, respect. Ethan stared back, still silent. His silence was no longer emptiness, no longer loneliness. It was strength, the kind that spoke louder than words. The alien placed its claw against its chest, bowing slightly. "Warrior," it said, looking directly at him. Not scavenger, not prey, not fragile, warrior. Ethan's throat tightened, but he said nothing. He only stood, his blade still in hand, his eyes steady on the smoking sky where more ships might one day come. The scrapyard around them was broken, yet alive. It was no longer just a graveyard of forgotten machines. It had become a battlefield, a place where a silent collector stood against the darkness and endured. As the sun dipped low, painting the ruins in gold, Ethan walked beside the alien. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. He had found something greater than silence. He had found purpose, and in the silence of broken machines, a new legend had been born.